The tension between Max B and Jim Jones resurfaced once again after Jim Jones mentioned Max in another round of interviews, reigniting a story that has followed both men for more than a decade. Even after years of separation, prison time, and shifting careers, Max B's name continues to come up whenever Jim Jones is asked about the Byrd Gang era. This time, however, the situation carried more weight because Max B is now free, present, and able to respond directly instead of through distance and silence. To understand why these mentions still matter, it's important to remember that this is not a casual disagreement. Max B and Jim Jones were closely linked during a formative moment in New York rap. Max B emerged as a distinct voice from Harlem, bringing what fans later called the wave sound, while Jim Jones was already an established Dipset figure building his Byrd Gang movement. Their partnership produced records that helped shape Jim's resurgence in the late 2000s and turned Max B into a cult figure even before mainstream recognition fully arrived. The relationship deteriorated quickly, largely over money, control, and recognition. Max B publicly expressed frustration over contracts and compensation, believing his creative contributions outweighed what he received. Jim Jones, on the other hand, viewed himself as the executive and leader who had invested in Max and introduced him to a larger platform. Those opposing perspectives escalated into public disses, interviews, and a clear professional split that turned personal over time. When Max B was incarcerated, the situation froze but never disappeared. His long prison sentence removed any possibility of reconciliation in real time, yet his influence continued to grow through mixtapes, fan loyalty, and cosigns from artists like French Montana. At the same time, Jim Jones continued to be asked about Max in interviews, and his responses consistently showed no interest in revisiting the past. He avoided deep explanations, dismissed reunion talk, and made it clear that whatever issues existed was settled in his mind. That dynamic remained unchanged for years. Jim Jones moved forward with his career, expanding into business and remaining visible in hip-hop media, while Max B became a symbol of unrealized potential. Fans framed Max as someone whose career was cut short at its peak, while Jim was often positioned as a gatekeeper figure who benefited most from their association. Whether fair or not, that framing kept the story alive. Everything changed once Max B was released. His return immediately triggered renewed interest in unresolved chapters from his past, particularly his fallout with Jim Jones. Interviews, footage, and social media posts began asking whether peace was possible now that Max was home. Jim Jones addressed these questions in multiple appearances, and his tone remained consistent. He reiterated that there would be no reunion and expressed no desire to work with Max again. Those comments, familiar in substance, carried new weight this time because Max could finally react. Max B's response did not come as an attack. Instead, it reflected distance, time, and perspective shaped by years of confinement. He acknowledged hearing Jim speak on him and framed the situation as permanently over. Rather than escalating the rhetoric, Max framed the conflict as a result of youth, ego, and poor handling of business relationships. His comments suggested awareness that both sides contributed to the breakdown, even while he did not retract his belief that he was mistreated during their working relationship. What stood out about Max's response was its tone. He did not present himself as bitter or aggressive. Instead, he appeared reflective, recognizing that the conditions surrounding their fallout were shaped by pressure and ambition rather than a single decision. That approach contrasted sharply with the more dismissive stance Jim Jones has continued to take when Max's name arises. The difference in tone highlighted how prison and time had reshaped Max's outlook, while Jim's perspective remained largely fixed. Despite this calmer response, confusion quickly followed when Max performed older material that included disses aimed at Jim Jones. Clips spread online suggesting that Max was reigniting the beef soon after expressing a more mature perspective. That narrative took hold fast on blogs and social media. However, Max later clarified that the performance was not intended as a new shot. He framed it as performing a catalog he built before incarceration, not an intentional move to restart conflict in the present. This clarification mattered because it aligned with his broader messaging. Max's response to Jim mentioning him again was not about reopening wounds, but about acknowledging history without letting it control the future. At the same time, he did not back away from his belief that the situation could have been handled better. His approach suggested acceptance without erasure, something fans interpreted as growth rather than surrender. Jim Jones' continued reluctance to engage reinforces the reality that resolution requires interest from both sides. While Max appears open to reframing the narrative, Jim has shown no indication that he wants to revisit the relationship in any form. That divide leaves the story unresolved, suspended between reflection on one side and refusal on the other. What this exchange ultimately revealed is that some hip-hop conflicts do not end with time alone. They evolve. With Max B now free and speaking for himself, the story has entered a new phase. The question is no longer whether Max will respond when Jim mentions him. The real question is whether acknowledgement without reconciliation is the final form this long-running story will take. With Max B now able to speak freely, the contrast between his response and Jim Jones' continued stance has become more pronounced. Jim's mentions of Max in interviews have followed a consistent pattern. When asked whether time, maturity, or distance could lead to reconciliation, Jim has repeatedly shut the idea down. His answers have been short, firm, and dismissive. He has made it clear that he does not see value in revisiting the Byrd Gang era or repairing that relationship, emphasizing that he has moved on professionally and personally. From Jim's perspective, revisiting the situation serves no purpose. He has framed the fallout as something settled long ago, regardless of how fans interpret the past. In doing so, Jim has positioned himself as someone unwilling to relitigate old grievances, even when those grievances remain a major part of public curiosity surrounding Max B's return. That refusal to engage has become part of Jim's public narrative, reinforcing the idea that the door is closed. Max B's approach stands in contrast. Rather than pushing for a reunion or demanding acknowledgement, Max has focused on explaining how the situation looked from his side without escalating it. He has spoken about ego, youth, and miscommunication as factors that contributed to the split. While he has not reversed his position on feeling underpaid or undervalued, he has framed those issues as part of a broader learning process rather than something that defines who he is now. This difference in posture has reshaped how fans view the situation. Where the early years of the beef were driven by anger and public disrecords, the current phase feels more like reflection versus rejection. Max's willingness to discuss the situation calmly has led many to reevaluate his role in the conflict. At the same time, Jim's unwillingness to elaborate has left his perspective unchanged, even as the context around it has shifted. The performance of older diss material became a flashpoint because it seemed to contradict Max's messaging. However, Max's explanation clarified that the material was part of his catalog, not a targeted move against Jim in the present. This distinction is important. Performing legacy work after long incarceration does not automatically signal renewed hostility. In Max's case, it reflected a return to music he made before his sentence, not a calculation about reopening conflict. Despite that clarification, the situation highlights how difficult it is to escape past narratives in hip-hop. Old lyrics, interviews, and sound bites continue to shape perception long after people change. Max's attempt to separate historical context from current intent shows awareness of this problem, but it also demonstrates how limited control artists have over how their actions are interpreted once content circulates online. What remains unresolved is whether acknowledgement without reconciliation is sustainable. Max has shown that he is capable of addressing the past without being consumed by it. Jim has shown that he sees no obligation to participate in that process. Both positions are internally consistent, but they lead to different outcomes. One invites closure on personal terms. The other maintains distance without explanation. This dynamic also reflects a broader theme within hip-hop culture. Long-standing conflicts often outlive their original causes because they become attached to identity, reputation, and public perception. Even after imprisonment, career shifts, and personal change, certain narratives remain frozen in time. The Max B and Jim Jones story is a clear example of how history can linger even when circumstances evolve. As Max moved forward with his life and career, his response suggests a desire to be defined by present actions rather than past disputes. He has not demanded validation from Jim, nor has he tried to force reconciliation through public pressure. Instead, he has acknowledged the reality of the situation and reframed it as a lesson rather than a wound. That approach reflects growth shaped by time and isolation. Jim Jones' stance, meanwhile, reflects finality, whether rooted in principle, pride, or experience. His refusal to engage suggests that he believes closure has already occurred. From his viewpoint, further discussion only reopens something that was closed years ago. That belief leaves no room for dialogue, even if the other side has changed. Ultimately, the renewed exchange is more about time than conflict. Maxby responded not with anger, but with perspective. Jim Jones responded, as he has before, by distancing himself entirely. With both sides standing in different places emotionally and philosophically, the story appears to have reached its limit. There may be no dramatic reconciliation or explosive escalation ahead. What remains is a long-standing hip-hop chapter defined by ambition, fallout, and unfinished connection. Maxby has spoken. Jim Jones has spoken. And now, for the first time in years, both voices exist in the same moment. Whether that moment leads to closure or simply mark the end of conversation is something only time will decide.